Israel's Iron Dome defense system intercepted a new volley of attacks from Iran.
The Israelis have conducted a series of strikes on the nation of Iran's nuclear program. This has caused a lot of people on the internet.com to believe that the evil orange man President Trump has betrayed his no new wars kind of promises. And in addition to that, a lot of people are concerned that the U.S. could be dragged into a broader regional conflict in the Middle East, which is giving a lot of people negative flashbacks of the Iraq War, and reasonably so. So in this particular video, we are going to break down what we know right now, what I think is likely to happen, and of course, whether or not any of this makes sense for the U.S. government to be involved with. And spoiler alert, the U.S. government sending troops to Iran to invade and topple their government is not something that I'm going to be in favor of. But before we get into all of that, I just want to say thank you to everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
And Israel says it has killed 9 Iranian scientists and has targeted oil, gas and nuclear facilities in a bid to cripple the country's nuclear capacity. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he is not done yet. We will hit every site and every target of the Ayatollah's regime, Netanyahu said. What they have felt so far is nothing compared to what's coming.
So earlier this week, we were all greeted with the news that the Israelis had done airstrikes on the nation of Iran, specifically targeting their nuclear facilities, certain government leaders, and certain nuclear scientists. And the official line from the United States government at that point in time was that the U.S. government was not involved. However, subsequent updates from the U.S. government indicated that there was some level of involvement. So let me try to clarify based on what we know now, with the full knowledge that in the future we could get updates that could totally prove all of this completely untrue. What appears to have happened is that the Israelis have had a plan to strike Iranian nuclear facilities. They are concerned about Iran getting a nuclear weapon. They're concerned about Iran funding all of their enemies. So it makes sense for them in isolation from us to be concerned with the nation of Iran in these regards. But the US government was trying to negotiate a nuclear deal. And during the course of those negotiations, President Trump set a 60-day timeline. Well, what seems to have happened is that timeline had expired, and on day 61, that's when the strikes had occurred. And by the way, President Trump was all but telegraphing these strikes, which is such a President Trump thing to do in the media right before that they happened.
Mr. President, how imminent is an Israeli strike on Iran?
Well, I don't want to say imminent, but it looks like it's something that could very well happen. Look, it's very simple, not complicated. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Well, I'd love to avoid the conflict. Iran's going to have to negotiate a little bit tougher, meaning they're going to have to give us some things that they're not willing to give us right now. I want them to be successful. I want them to be tremendous. We'll help them be successful. We'll trade with them. We'll do whatever is necessary.
And it appears, as of right now, at this moment in time, the conflict between whether or not the U.S. is involved or not involved is all dependent on whether or not you interpret Benjamin Netanyahu going to President Trump, telling him that the deadline expired and they're ready to move forward, and then President Trump's administration saying, okay, fine, you're right, the deadline's over, go forth with your attack. It appears, as of right now, that is the extent of the U.S.'s involvement in the initial strikes, as well as, of course, clearing airspace between Israel and Iran in order for these strikes to occur. So that's what we know, or that's what we knew at the time that I'm recording this video about these particular strikes at this moment in time. Now, immediately, the internet.com was flooded with posts and all different pundits going off on how Americans shouldn't die for Israel, and how Israel's starting World War III, and how they called the Iran war between the U.S. and Iran, and now it's finally coming to fruition. And I just want to make something 100% clear to everybody out there in the audience. The U.S. should not send troops to Iran. We should not do that under almost any circumstances. Obviously, if there is a direct attack against the United States of America, you have to respond, but we should all be hopeful that nothing of the sort ends up happening, because we don't want to fight a war on that terrain with a population that's 4 times the size of the Iraqi population, because the Iraq war was already a quagmire and disaster, and Iran, if we were to send ground troops, would be an even bigger quagmire and an even bigger disaster. So let's be clear about that from the jump. I would hope that the overwhelming majority of Americans are not in favor of that, and they will not be swayed to be in favor of that in the future, and I understand that concern. That being said, there are a ton of people who have been calling the U.S. going to war with Iran for about 20 years in this country, and every time there's a little blip or incident between the U.S., between Israel and Iran, they end up saying that this is it, this is happening, and then when it doesn't happen, when they're proven wrong by reality, these people never retract. They just dust themselves off, come back at the next incident and say that the war is upon us yet again, only for that to not happen. Remember, this happened with Soleimani when Trump ended up killing him when he was in Iraq. People were saying that that guy getting killed because he was the number 2 in Iran definitely 100% meant the U.S. was going to war with Iran. Did it happen? I'm just asking you guys out there in the audience, did we already have this war that people have been calling for about 20 years? No, it didn't. And this is why I'm incredibly skeptical of all these different various people who never take accountability for their predictions, and why I land squarely in the camp of nothing ever happens ever, and I hope that all of you will join me, because the fact is, there is a such thing as a limited military engagement that is short of boots on the ground and a U.S. invasion and U.S. soldiers dying. And by the way, to be clear, I don't want any U.S. soldiers to die for Israel or U.S. citizens, but the fact is, nobody's really asking for that. I mean, sure, you can find people in the Israeli government who are like, the U.S. needs to join us in our strikes against Iran. That definitely exists. We also are probably getting pressure from Saudi Arabia, who's Iran's natural enemy, being a Sunni power near Iran as the Shia power. But the fact is, this is not a thing that I believe we are being dragged towards at this moment in time. And this isn't something that I think President Trump is willing to burn his legacy on. And that being said, his social media posts could be very concerning to people out there in the audience, so let me just run them through really quickly so you can understand what he's posting right now. So at the time of me recording this video, President Trump has reposted a screenshot from his Truth Social that says unconditional surrender. Just before that, he reposted this, which reads as follows: "We know exactly where the so-called quote-unquote supreme leader is hiding. He is an easy target, but is safe there. We are not going to take him out. Parentheses, kill, with an exclamation point, at least not for now. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. Thank you for your attention on this matter." And then just before that, he says, "We now have complete control of the skies over Iran. Iran had good sky trackers and other defensive equipment and plenty of it, but it doesn't compare to American-made, conceived, and manufactured stuff," in quotes for some reason. "Nobody does it better than the good old USA." Now, had this been somebody other than President Donald J. Trump, I would be way more concerned about these posts than I am at this moment in time. And it's not because President Trump is some dove. I mean, people are now posting compilations of the evil orange man saying that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon over and over and over again repeatedly as proof positive that he's always been on this train. And in addition to that, President Trump was the most pro-Israel president in modern history, so it's unsurprising to see him aligned with the Israelis. But that being said, Israel notoriously uses United States weapons. In fact, our foreign aid to them is sent to them under the condition that they buy weapons from U.S. weapons manufacturers. So when he's talking about stuff made in the USA and then he's talking about we, he could be using a loose version of the royal we that does not necessarily include the United States of America quite literally patrolling the skies of Iran. Now, I could be wrong. There could be a joint patrolling of the skies between the two nations. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case, but it seems like he's taking the time to brag about U.S. power, and he's also putting the pressure on the Ayatollah in order to force him into a surrender, which, by the way, is unsurprising because President Trump likes to threaten people with military force way more than he likes to actually engage in warfare. If you guys will recall, the way that he forced Kim Jong-un to the table back in the day was that he kept threatening escalation with North Korea. A lot of people reported that the US was going to go to war with North Korea at the time, but ultimately what we ended up seeing was that this was all a part of the strategy. And this has been a repeated strategy throughout his presidency to threaten people over and over again in order to get them to the table. And in my opinion, this is part of the bluff factor or the bolstering of American power or stating American power without actually intending on using it. Again, I don't think, in my genuine opinion, that President Trump wants to send U.S. troops to Iran. That being said, let's talk about whether or not it is a good idea for the Israelis, separate from us, to overthrow the Iranian government. Now, here are the reasons why you would not want to overthrow the Iranian government. The first one is the most obvious in my opinion, and that is the devil you know situation. As bad as the current regime is in Iran, as much as they fund a bunch of these different various proxy groups, the fact is these are people that we know what they're about. We know they're trying to get a nuclear weapon in order to protect the regime, and you don't know what will come after if they are overthrown. So obviously, based on history in the Middle East, where you remove dictatorships and you end up having a more radical underlying population take over, a la what is possibly happening in Syria, what definitely happened in Iraq, what of course ultimately ended up happening in Libya, this would be a disastrous scenario. And there are a million good reasons in order to just stop there after the devil you know situation. In addition to that, the current Iranian regime already has a governing structure in their country. So if you can get them to the table, even by force, then you actually have mechanisms within that country to maintain power and maintain whatever agreement that you want to put forward in the future. So those are actually two very good reasons not to do this, past history in the Middle East, and of course, the fact that you could have an unstable country, a failed state in that particular area post any kind of overthrowing that could lead to a bunch of different forms of chaos. That being said, and again, I want to be clear, this is not a reason to overthrow. This is not me advocating for overthrowing. There are doubts against those two particular arguments. First and foremost, unlike the population of Iraq, unlike the population of Libya, unlike the population of Syria, where they had a secular dictatorship that kind of kept the different various radical factions in line, the Iranian population, at least according to the polling, as we see right now, is actually less radical than the current regime. So there is a good chance that the next governing force might be some form of secular dictatorship. And I'm not even going to talk about the word democracy because I don't even know if that would be a good thing. And they might be just a better, more moderate force because the current government is so extreme. In addition to that, Iran is the Shia power in the region. And the fact of the matter is, Shia governments end up acting differently than Sunni governments and Sunni populations. A lot of the terror organizations that we're concerned about, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Mujahideen, all these different various groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, although I'm not 100% sure about the Muslim Brotherhood, but I'm just going to throw them in there and fact check it later and then edit it out if I'm proven wrong. Those are all Sunni extremist organizations. So again, in that particular case, you're probably expecting some kind of a different response and a different rebuttal post the Ayatollah being removed from power. That being said, to me, it is not in the United States' best interest to have a goal of regime change. If they end up getting toppled, it is what it is. You deal with the aftermath. But the fact is, I don't want to see another Muslim majority country go through this whole thing where they do a pretend democracy and elect a new dictatorship. Now, again, if the Shah of Iran was still around, the King of Kings, then I would 100% be behind this because the Shah is awesome. Everything you heard about the Shah is propaganda. The Shah is the true divine ruler of the nation of Iran, which is of course Persia, and those are just objectively facts. Yeah, so as of right now, I'm not really all that panicked about this particular situation developing in the Middle East. I am of course concerned about the price of oil rising. I am concerned about how deep the United States is going to be involved. But the fact is, we're already in this situation where we're funding Israel. We're already in this situation where we're defending Saudi Arabia. We're already in this situation where we're propping up the Pakistani government, the Egyptian government, and all these different various governments around that region. So the fact that they're going to use that in order to take out their enemy, if they are successful, which is a giant if, by the way, way, that might be the only thing that could provide us some kind of path to not be funding all of this nonsense. But again, I would definitely monitor the money that is being sent over there, even if it just comes back in the purchase of U.S. weapons, because that is our tax dollars. And even if it represents a low portion of our federal budget, which by the way, we have $1 trillion in interest payments each and every year, so we shouldn't even be affording any little bit of money out the door. The fact is, it is something that should be of concern to us. And obviously, getting roped into a war would not only be disastrous for us, for Americans, but it would be a disaster for President Trump's legacy. That being said, we're not there yet. And everybody pretending that we are, everybody saying that they called the Iran-US war for the 600th time, they honestly genuinely should shut up. I mean, you can keep warning or whatever, but if you're one of those people who said all these other instances were on the brink of us in war with Iran, if you've been calling it for 25 years and it hasn't happened, then eventually you gotta just say that you are wrong. Like, you have to acknowledge that you were incorrect about your assertion, and the idea that there is no such thing as a limited military engagement that doesn't involve boots on the ground is absurd. The US does that all the time. The Iraq war is actually the outlier. Now, to be clear, we are hearing some of the stuff about nuclear weapons development and, weapons of mass destruction and all the lies that the Bush administration ended up telling us back in the day during the Iraq war, and that should also be concerning. That being said, it is reasonable to be worried about Iran getting a nuclear weapon. I see a lot of people talk about how, why is Israel allowed to have nukes, but Iran isn't allowed to have nukes? And it's as if these people don't understand the idea of a new country getting nukes presenting new threats versus us trying to manage the current nuclear powers that we have. I mean, in reality, based on what I told you about radical Sunni Muslim populations, the most concerning nation on planet Earth is by far and away Pakistan. But unfortunately, if Iran were to get a nuke, that would incentivize Saudi Arabia to get a nuke, and then we would have all kinds of crazy nuclear proliferation around the Middle East. And that's something that is in the best interest of the United States of America, whether you like it or not, to try to avoid. Now, as for how far Iran was in getting a nuclear weapon, honestly, no clue. I expect the timelines to be radically off from reality. I don't buy into any of that, but they were enriching uranium, and people can say that they were doing it in order to have nuclear power, but the fact is, Iran is very notoriously an oil-rich country. They can power their nation through oil. It seems like there may be something legitimate to this, especially since the Israelis ended up engaging the attack. Remember, the United States went to Iraq. Israel didn't. And if we're going to go into a country, I do believe our people can be misled, but if the Israelis are going to actually risk their own people to do something, I think in reality that there might be a little bit closer to building something than we previously thought. Now, of course, you guys know I am an Israeli shill. Actual Israel warrior, shill for Israel, shill Sean Fitzgerald, more like Sean Fitzgerald Steen or Stein, whichever one sounds more Jewish. So obviously, you shouldn't trust a single word that comes out of my face because I'm currently being paid by the Mossad. They are giving me monies in my pockets in order for me to deceive all of you into supporting the Jews as the overlords. So that's definitely a thing. I just want you guys to be aware of that. I'm not supposed to tell you that in my Mossad pamphlet that they gave me when they gave me all that money with all these talking points. They said don't share this part, but I'm gonna share it with all of you because you guys already know it. Now, I know I'm supposed to say war bad, weapons of mass destruction lies, Iraq all over again. I called the Iran-US war, and Benjamin Netanyahu is a no good bad guy, but the fact is, right now, at this moment in time, that's not where I'm at in this situation. Now, to be clear, to clarify for the 1,000th time, the US should not send ground troops to Iran. Absolutely not. And honestly, to all the people who say if Israel wants to go to war with Iran, they should do it themselves, you should be happy because they're pretty much doing it themselves. Now, of course, there's US money there. We all understand that, but they're the ones who appear to be doing the bombings and the fightings. Obviously, we have aircraft carriers as a deterrent in the Middle East. Obviously, we're helping shoot down Iranian missiles going back the other way, but we're not the ones at this moment in time putting our people at risk. And I think that is a good thing. In fact, a lot of President Trump's threats are threats about containing Iran so that they don't attempt to strike U.S. military bases that are in the region. That's actually good. I don't want the Iranians to retaliate against us because we're aligned with Israel, and that to be used to justify us sending in troops into Iran, because as I've said throughout the course of this, that would be a disastrous scenario. Again, 4 times the size of Iraq, way worse terrain in order to fight on, and of course, all the other issues that we would engage in that particular region, not to mention that our treasury is already significantly depleted from previous Middle Eastern interventionism. So yeah, I'm fine letting the Israelis do their thing. That doesn't bother me at all. At this point in time, we're already in for a penny of giving money to this country. So I'm like, whatever, that's going to happen no matter what. Maybe that's just me accepting it. So I'm fine for that to continue for this moment in time. But in the hopes that if there is some kind of resolution, whether it's a peace deal or the overthrow and installation of the Shah, the King of Kings, the true leader of Iran, that we can finally just start pulling money out of there, that we can finally stop managing the area. But you know, I'm so into the nothing ever happens ever kind of thing and nothing ever really changes ever kind of thing that I kind of know that that's a pipe dream, and we're going to be sending money to these other countries for the longest time until our country is bankrupt, and even after our country's bankrupt, if we're being perfectly honest. Like that's where this is all going. But you know what? As of right now, I would say don't panic. Some people say trust the plan, but I never like that phraseology. But of course, I want to know what you guys think about all this down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about how we're not quite at Iraq War 2.0, this time Iran edition. Till next time.